It is with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Dena Samuels, our keynote speaker, as well as Susan Brodie, our Colorado State Programs Co-Vice President. Dr. Samuels taught for 20 years at UCCS here in the Springs. She is now a full-time consultant. The format for this presentation will be an interview with Dr. Samuels by Susan. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. All right, I'm here. Dena, welcome. How you doing?
Good morning.
Cool.
Good morning.
Good morning. Boy, it seems like a long time coming. We've been working on this for quite a while. And I'm so glad to have you here and to be able to talk to you today. As Paula mentioned, this is kind of a unique program. We're looking at ourselves in that the way we think and the way we view things and how they might need to be changed. And that's different than any kind of a leadership fall conference we've ever attempted. So I am excited to go on this journey with you. We have 5 big concepts to look at today. I kind of look at it as a question of what are these concepts? What do they mean to us? And what can you say to us about them? One of them is mindfulness. One of them is leadership. And we've already heard Paula say what a big concept that is. And then we've got diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we will be looking at the relative importance of those and what they mean and your expertise in how you train others in those areas and help them develop a way to apply mindfulness, use mindfulness as a tool as they lead and operate in the areas of these, what I think they call DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm going to start out and ask you to start out with helping us know what you'd like our audience to get out of today's discussion and what they will take away. What is it that we hope they will take away from today's presentation?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Susan. And thank you for inviting me. I am so honored to be here. It's truly a treat for me, especially because I've been using AAUW's resource as a resource for all the years I've been teaching. So I'm very familiar with the organization, and it's just an honor to be invited to participate in this leadership conference too. So boy, those 5 concepts that you mentioned could be a full week-long retreat just to go through those 5. So to do what we want to do in half an hour, it's going to be an interesting challenge.
We're going to really...
Yeah, we're going to just, give a little snippets, but,
yeah.
Folks also, I want folks to know that, there's lots more opportunities. So we can talk about that as well. But what I'd like for them to get, even out of the short time that we'll be together this morning, is just the idea of a sort of a different way of thinking about the tools that we can use for leadership. Oftentimes we come at leadership from a place of, or we think what it is it means, knowing and doing and, being in charge and all of that. And it's a sort of a both and, because I look at it more as an internal process, just as importantly as the external process. And so it's sort of what I do, what I teach is really leading from the inside out. And so hopefully by the end of our time today, folks will sort of understand what I'm talking about a little bit more, understand mindfulness as a tool for leadership development, and also to do a little bit of a practice. That's what I'm hoping for. And then, I can touch a little bit on how it impacts diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's what I'm hoping for today. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, so let's start out with that word mindfulness. I can remember, I'm old enough, and probably everybody in the audience is old enough, when we didn't talk about mindfulness. We weren't really, I don't know, back in the 70s, maybe that was kind of a new agey kind of a thing, but I don't think mindfulness was as big a practice option as maybe it is today. So what do you mean by mindful? What do you mean by mindfulness?
Right, thank you. So first of all, I didn't make up the word, right? It's really important in terms of cultural appropriation that we honor where it came from, right? So originally it came from Eastern practices and other religious practices. That's really what at the heart of what it is. It's come to the West in the last maybe 40, 50 years. You know, that folks from the United States in particular have gone over to and studied mindfulness and brought it back with them. So there's a ton of research. And if you look up mindfulness now, there's over 100,000 books on the topic with mindfulness in the title. One of them is mine, but it's called The Mindfulness Effect. And the important piece to this too is to understand that it can be used as, and the way I teach it is it can be, if you do any kind of religious, if you have any kind of religious practice, meaning maybe it's prayer, maybe it's a spiritual practice, or maybe it's just focusing on the present moment right now, like focusing on our breath, that any of those practices actually calm your parasympathetic system and make us much more focused on what's going on around us in this moment. So when I talk about mindfulness in general, my favorite way to describe it or to help people to understand it is the idea of present moment awareness. So being aware of yourself in this moment. So noticing what's happening in your body, noticing what's happening outside your body, and moving from there. I also use mindfulness as a leadership tool, and we can talk a little bit more about that as we go as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because one of the things I wanted to back up into, just because we're looking at ourselves and looking at the way our internal processes operate, it's not that we are not going to go out and trying to change things or trying to have an impact in the world. But what I'm hearing you say is we're going to start with looking in first, mm-hmm. that it will be more effective. And so when you say this, in my mind, sometimes I have always said, is this the same thing as meditation? Are we talking about, do I need to be a meditator? Do I have to do, some kind of a special thing every day to be mindful?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I get that question quite a lot, the difference between mindfulness and meditation. And the way I like to think about it is, as based on what you just said, is to begin within. To begin within. And so the idea is perhaps, so if I the way I try to teach mindfulness is the idea that it's sort of an umbrella term for a lot of different practices. And meditation, like formal meditation, is one of those mindfulness practices. There's tons and tons of other ways to practice mindfulness. And so what that means is whether you have a formal practice, maybe some folks have some sort of a meditation practice, and yes, that is mindfulness, right? If you don't have a meditation practice, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not doing mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is this idea that you are coming to this present moment in whatever way that works for you. So the one thing I love about it is that it can happen any time of day. So I tend to go through the majority of my day in a mindful state, which means that as I'm interacting with others, as I'm going about my day, I'm sort of focused on how, focusing on my breath or focusing on sort of the broader picture. It's sort of like perspective taking, if you will. Right. And so that's sort of how I go about my day, but that's taken years of practice to do that throughout my day. So for folks who are starting out, especially doing that for a couple of minutes, maybe you are in a car and you're stopped at a red light. And normally you might be frustrated because, you're trying to get somewhere and you're whatever. And that's, to me, I look at that as, wow, this is a moment of allowing myself to pause and focus inward to begin with then. And so maybe it's waiting in line somewhere, or you are, any moment in your day that you remember to just focus on your breath. All of a sudden, things around you may not change, like there might still be the chaos of the world, but you actually have changed because your focus has shifted. And so now you're able to breathe a little deeper. And you got to realize, from a leadership standpoint, you're now coming at whatever situation arises from a very different place. Yeah.
Okay.
Opposed to what's going on around you.
Yeah, I love how you talk about that, because that sounds like a really awesome, essentially daunting thing to be able to do, which is to be like mindful every moment of the day. That sounds like, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to do that for a long time. But we're not talking about that. We're really saying, just when you think about it, see if it would be something you could do. So I don't know if you're ready. When we had our little pre-interview, I thought that notion of the 10-second vacation was really cool. I don't know if you're ready to go into that now, but I feel like that kind of gives us a sense of, if I'm going to try to apply this, if this is a valuable thing to apply, how do I do that? How can I have a little way to get into that?
Yeah, and so I'm happy to share a practice with you yeah, absolutely. And I want to just add to that, the thing that I love, I'm coming from a social justice background, what I love about mindfulness is it's available, it's accessible to everyone at every minute of any day. So that if things feel like chaotic, especially with the world as it is right now, that you have access to peace and calmness from within at any moment. And the other thing that I love about it, again, from a social justice perspective, is it doesn't cost a penny, right?
Yeah.
And it really only takes 10 seconds. I'm going to share a practice with you all now that I call a 10-second vacation. It will take longer than 10 seconds because I'm going to sort of explain it and go through it. We're going to practice it a few times. But just know that once you understand the process, it literally, you could be whatever's going on in your life, as a leadership tool. Again, you could be, giving a talk or be the leader of an organization. And oftentimes we are reacting to what happens around us. And when we're reacting that way, we're typically not at our best when we're reacting. What mindfulness allows us to do, if we remember to use the tool, is to actually slow down, to breathe through it, and then take in all the information and respond. So it's the difference between reacting from, a quick reaction that is maybe not going to take everything into account, and that maybe it's based on old patterns or old fears or stereotypes and all of that. It tends to be when we're able to slow down and respond differently. All of a sudden now we're creating a much more inclusive space, and we're actually, it's better, we make better choices when we slow things down. So I say all that sort of as context for understanding this particular practice, and here's one way to do it. There's a million different mindfulness and guided meditations and all of that you can try. I actually have 25 meditations from my book are actually available online on Insight Timer, which is one of many meditation mindfulness practice apps that you can have access to. The other thing before we get started too is that you can you can have a timer set up. I oftentimes will have a timer on my phone that will just have a little bell that rings at any given time. At the time, I've set it for the times of the day where I am most likely to be so engrossed that I forget that I have the practice available. And the bell goes off, and even if I'm in the midst of writing an email, my hands come off the keyboard, And just for 10 seconds, I take a breath. And all of a sudden, I'm now coming back to the email from a different perspective. So that's what it can do. That's what it can do. That's the benefits of it. So let's practice together. What I'm going to invite folks to do, and it'll be short. So if this is something that you're nervous about or anxious about or think it's not for me, I recommend, I mean, first of all, you're welcome to opt out because it'll be short. But on the other hand, feel free to try it. If it's something you've never done before, feel free to try it and just see how it feels on your body. If you don't like it, you never have to do it again. If you do like it, there's so much more, right? There's so much more available. So I'm going to invite folks to, just for a moment, to just notice your body in your seat. And just notice what your shoulders are doing. Notice what your jaw is doing. If there's any tension, just notice that first. And if it feels comfortable to you to close your eyes, you can feel free to do so. If that doesn't feel comfortable to you for whatever reason, you can just gently gaze down, maybe 6 or 12 inches in front of you. Just gently gazing down, not a hard stare or a glare, but more of just a gentleness. This is a moment of compassion for yourself. And again, it's the idea of noticing what's happening in your body. We oftentimes are holding our gut or our jaw clenched. Our shoulders sometimes are up around our ears. And this is just a moment to just notice what's happening. What's your baseline? And then I'm going to invite you just to notice what your breath is doing. Just notice if your breath is calm or if there's some tension there, whether it's a jagged breath or it's a smooth breath. And just focusing inward on its own is a beautiful practice, a beautiful mindful practice that calms us down. And so the 10-second vacation in particular is really the idea of inhaling for 4 seconds and exhaling for 6. And it doesn't have to be exact, but the idea is that you want your exhale to be slightly longer than your inhale. And the reason is that with an elongated exhale, what it does to your brain is it calms your parasympathetic system. It lowers your cortisol level, which is your stress hormone. And it just calms us down. It's a very soothing practice. So just practice on your own count to inhale for 4 and exhale for 6. And I'm going to give you just a moment to do that a few times and just notice what happens in your body. And when you're ready, go ahead and take one more deep inhale. And go ahead and exhale. And if your eyes are closed or gaze down, feel free, or if they're closed, go ahead and feel free to flutter them open when you're ready. And as I like to say, welcome back. So that's the 10-second vacation. And I obviously gave folks time to do it a few times so that they just get the hang of it and understand. But if you are feeling stressed or whatever, and you remember the practice, you know, whether you're in a leadership, you know, situation, or, you know, something, you just got a phone call that's been frustrating to you, or whatever it is, this actually allows us to just respond to that moment. Yeah. So I would ask, yeah, how that felt for you, Susan.
That felt, that's a very similar thing to what I do in meditation. So it was very relaxing to see that that's not unlike what I could do it in a shorter space during the day, not have to feel like, oh, you've got to be in your meditation cushion and on, you're doing it all. It was a chance to do it much more quickly, and that it would have the same effect or a similar effect. So very good, very good.
Thank you. It's great.
I think other people have that experience too, and what other practices they may take, that this is a pretty common element of some of those.
Absolutely. And I will also say too, that if you have a traditional meditation, whether it's on a cushion or what have you, that, you know, that's wonderful. As I said, that's a wonderful meditation practice, but it's not the only way to get the benefits from mindfulness. Yeah.
Yeah, I love hearing that. That is a very positive input to me. I notice we've got maybe 5-6 more minutes. I want to be sure we get to some of the applications of this in our thinking about inclusion and diversity and the challenges of the conflicts that are going on today. And I'm wondering if you could spend a little bit of time talking about how you might use mindful leadership in those areas.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been teaching social justice studies in the Women's and Ethnic Studies program at the University of Colorado down in Colorado Springs for, you know, over 20 years. And I'm a consultant, as Paula had mentioned at the beginning, I'm a consultant full-time now. I left my tenured position about 2 years ago. Part of that had to do with my latest book, as I mentioned, The Mindfulness Effect. I was invited to, could I please create a online course that goes with it, because there's so much in it. It's 25 mindfulness practices that take folks through not only health and wellness, but healing, self-empowerment, culturally inclusive leadership development, social justice, and environmental justice. So it's a lot in one book. So I have an online course. I have actually many online courses now, especially with COVID, that folks, if folks want more, especially around how this applies to diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's tons on my website, denasamuels.com. All that to show, I wanted to throw that in because since we have such a short amount of time, I want you to know there's other, you know, there's other ways to get more information. But I will say this, that about 6 or 7 years ago, I came across some research that showed that if you have any kind of mindfulness practice, so again, that could be a religious practice, maybe you have prayer for a couple minutes a day, maybe it's a spiritual practice, maybe it's just focusing on the present moment, as we've just done, for a few minutes a day, it ends up lowering your implicit or unconscious biases. And when I heard this, when I learned this research, I got really excited because, first of all, I've been teaching about bias for decades, literally, and happened to have my own mindfulness practice from my own healing journey, which I talk about in the preface of my book. Was not a pleasant journey I went on, but happy to be on the other side of it. And mindfulness was a big part of that, my own healing journey. And so it sort of pulled my worlds together. And I thought, oh, this is it. You know, this is really the key to leadership from the inside out. And so all that to say that when you think about it, it actually makes sense that if I'm really focused on the present moment, when I am interacting with somebody who has different social identities than I do, so maybe a different race or a different gender or a different sexual orientation or a different ability level, all of those kind, or age is absolutely that we're talking about being in the present moment with the individual in front of us. And what tends to happen is our biases, the stereotypes that we unfortunately tend to live by through osmosis, no blame or shame here, but those stereotypes tend to stick because our culture is filled with them. And so some of those stereotypes get stuck in our brain, and we end up reacting based on those stereotypes. With mindfulness practice, being in the present moment, you can actually interact with the person in front of you, and a lot of those stereotypes and biases can actually calm down, right? They're not doing this in your brain, you know, being chaotic, and we call that monkey mind, you know, the idea that they're all spinning in your head, that you can really be focused on the present moment. And your interaction, it turns out, completely changes with the person in front of you. That is not to say that we're ignoring the differences between us. I'm not suggesting that at all. That's called spiritual bypassing. We don't want to do that, right? We really want to focus on the individual with all that they bring, right? All of their identities, just as we would want other people to see all of our identities, right? So all of a sudden your interaction is different. And that is not only a leadership skill, but it's also a much more inclusive way to be in terms of our workplaces and in terms of our lives in general. Yeah. So that's a quick overview. Yeah.
It just seems like, speaking from a person, all of these things that we're looking to improve and minimize the bias would, if we started with mindfulness, would be at least a step forward. And so it may be that training people in mindfulness is our next step, but I don't know if that's where everybody is sitting. Do you think that as you provide these trainings and that you develop online trainings, and I'm assuming you also do in-person trainings when you have a chance, are people receptive to this? Is this something that you are finding you can bring to people, and it does make a difference for them in the workplace and in their organizations?
Thank you for that question, because I love this. When I was deciding, you know, what to actually title my last book, I was a little nervous about using the word mindfulness because I thought, well, maybe some people will think it's like sort of out there somewhere. And as I did my research, as I mentioned, you know, over 100,000 titles on the topic. So, but what really happened was I had a conversation with the chief of the police academy in Denver. And he said to me, because I went in and I said, can I help with implicit bias training? Like this, I feel like this is life or death given police brutality that's happening. Can I help with that? And he said to me, we're already doing implicit bias training. And I said, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. And he kind of leaned in a little bit and he said, we're also teaching mindfulness. And I was like, the police are teaching mindfulness. I got so excited. And the truth is now I work with almost every single military branch right now. They're wanting to learn mindfulness techniques, from the Coast Guard to the Air Force to the West Point to the Army. I mean, we're talking across the board. I work with NASA. This is, people all over the planet are getting more engaged with this notion of really doing social justice from the inside out. And yeah, so 100% yes. And people are seeing a difference between how they're interacting with others in that, especially across social differences.
And they're actually seeing that impact, because, you know, we talked a little bit earlier. I come from a background of corporate training, and obviously we had to do diversity training, and we did, I don't know if we called it equity and inclusion, but we did diversity training, and it was not well received. It was not a happy time for people. They didn't care for the trainings. It kind of made them mad. And we were struggling to find ways to make an impact that was positive for our leaders and our employees. So I'm really glad to hear that we've moved on from that. So this must have been in the time past. So let me now bring this down to AAUW. We have been working on women's equity and now pay equity for decades, actually over 1881 we started. Can you give us some ideas? The people in the audience are branch members. They're also branch leaders. And I'd like to have your thoughts about how could we bring this to our branches, either as an action item or as a program that would be something we could benefit from and use as we go forward with our issues with equity that we're focusing on. Not that we're interested in all forms of inequity, but I think we're mostly saying our niche is women's equity, and particularly in the pay area.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this, and in a way, as a consultant, I have the opportunity to say this, and hopefully it's not going to be too hard to hear. But if you look around, I mean, in your organization, who's in your organization? Right? We want to be asking that question all the time. That's a social justice question of, is it primarily white folks? And if so, why? And what's happening there? So like looking at, when I say begin within, it's not just within your own body and your own, self, but also within
in our own organization.
Yeah, exactly. So be thinking about that and what that looks like. And as I mentioned before, asking the question why is that so? And how might you do things differently? So that's a question. Oftentimes you just go forward and say, well, no one else is interested or whatever. And I don't think that's necessarily the most robust answer we can come up with. It may be that we need to look within the organization to say, what else could we be doing? What does our outreach look like? So that could be true across all branches, that you're asking that question. Thinking about different genders, right? And so perhaps looking at transgender folks too, right? And seeing what does that mean? So it's beyond just race. It's, we're looking at it from an intersectional perspective. We're looking at age differences, all of this, who is in the organization and who's not right now, and who could be, who might be, if you did your outreach a little differently. So that's one aspect. And then looking at pay equity in general. Before I get to that, I also want to say, bringing in the idea in your meetings of taking a moment to pause and reflect. Some of your branches already may do this, but taking that, what I call a mindful moment at the beginning, to sort of get folks focused inward and focused together as a group. You can do this even on screen,
Zoom.
Right? On Zoom.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So that folks know that, they're focused on each other, that they're building community. I have a whole online course on how to make your virtual meetings more effective, engaging, and inclusive. So, there's so many, like that's a whole nother webinar we could do, but the idea is really to make people feel not only like they're included, but that they belong. So that's within the organization. There's a million ideas there. In addition to that, thinking about equity in general and looking outward into not only your constituency, but what are you doing in the world as part of your vision and your mission, is just thinking about what else might you be doing in terms of, like, it might be a brainstorming session around what could you be doing to extend your reach, perhaps, or for folks to understand that the resources that you all have available, like to be promoting that in different ways so that more people might be using AAUW as a resource, like I've done for so many decades. I heard about it because one of my colleagues mentioned it, and I started doing the research, and I went, oh my gosh, this is such a gold mine of information. And I've been promoting it for years on my own, saying, oh, this is the AAUW doing that, this is where this comes from, and all of that. And so, but continuing to think about your reach as an organization, and that alone, when people see you as a resource, that alone will actually increase education. And I think ultimately that's your goal, from my understanding anyway, is to get people to understand what the pay equity even is. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are still shocked when I talk about pay equity. They're like, really? In 2020, we still have this issue like this, really? They don't know. They don't even know, which is
Yes.
a problem. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And it's different for different backgrounds, races. It is not, not uniformly moving in the same direction. So yeah, I think that's it. That's very valuable. Thanks for sharing those ideas. So I think we're right now up against the Q&A period. So we've already had a couple of questions that you've answered. I'm going to ask Carolyn Cooley, our co-host, if she will respond or share some of the questions that have come through on the Q&A. And if you've got a question and you would like to ask it, please put it in the Q&A so that we can take a look at it.
Okay, the first question that I have, and hopefully you haven't talked about any of these. I had to walk away to help someone try to get on. But the first question is, what police departments in Colorado are learning mindfulness?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. I don't know all of them because I haven't, I haven't been either approached or spent time to do that particular research. But I will say, when I talked to the police, the head of the police academy here in Denver, he said that he is being asked to go not only throughout Colorado, but all over the country, as you know, especially around implicit bias, but also he adds the mindfulness piece to it. So that was super exciting to me. I think we need more. It is something that I have been sort of, especially since Floyd's murder in the end of May, I have been almost inundated with requests about bringing mindfulness and diversity education to organizations, corporations, academies, universities, schools, etc. And so have not had a chance to do that particular research, to do outreach to all of the police, what do you call offices, whatever, police stations around the state. But I think that would be wonderful to have that information so that we could be promoting this idea of really responding in a more healthy way. That moment of pausing, that mindful moment, even before a police officer engages their weapons, could save lives. I mean, a lot of lives. And also in terms of first responders, I learned this just having connected with other first responders. I've worked with the fire department in New York, in fact, and one of the things that I've learned along the way is that within 5 years of a first responder responding to a traumatic situation, I mean, that's what they're trained to do, that without any kind of practice to understand how to cope with the PTSD, they're more likely to have killed themselves than they are to have died in the actual what they were responding to. And that's because of PTSD and having no tools available to them. And because our culture teaches you don't need help, you just need to, tough it out. That doesn't work. We know very well that doesn't work. And so many police departments are, in fact, bringing mindfulness into their training specifically so that, at the end of the day, later on, that their police force will actually have the tools that they need to actually get through the PTS, as opposed to, gritting their teeth through the experience and also through their lives.
Okay, the second one is in the virtual meeting effectiveness, or is the virtual meeting effectiveness module on your website?
It is. All of my trainings are available through my website. So, and there's 2 ways that I offer them. One is through a self-paced online pre-recorded kind of course. And the other is that I come in and do a training for an organization like we're doing now. So it's what I call a virtual classroom, which is kind of what this is, right? That, but a little differently, where I can see everybody's faces and there's interaction throughout, as opposed to this, which is more of the webinar format. So there are two different ways. One is the pre-recorded self-paced, and the other is the virtual classroom with me, live, live-ish, virtual live. Yeah, it's the language is crazy right now, but yeah.
And then one person asked that you share the title of your book again.
Oh, sure. It's called The Mindfulness Effect. The Mindfulness Effect. And the subtitle is An Unexpected Path to Healing, Connection, and Social Justice. Yeah. And that's also on my website. And my website's easy to get to, denasamuels.com. So.
And I have one last one, and this had to do when we were doing the mindfulness exercise. She says that when she does Tai Chi and she exhales longer, she panics and takes another deep breath. I always feel when I exhale that I need more intake of breath. And is this normal?
Sure. So there may be some, I don't know the health, the health and wellness piece of your particular case. But I would say this, that if you're exhaling for too long, that you might feel like, oh my gosh, I'm running out of breath. And so maybe shorten it just a little bit. So you could, when I say 4 and 6 seconds, so inhale for 4 and exhale for 6, it doesn't have to be a traditional second. The idea is just to allow your exhale to be just slightly longer than your inhale. So if you're feeling like you're trying to catch your breath, that's not gonna be a mindfulness practice anymore. That's gonna be more of a, causing you some more stress, which is not the goal of this at all. So the idea is, counting to 4 in what fits to your body is great. And even if it's exhaling to 5, that's okay too, as long as it's a little bit longer than your inhale. And you don't have to look at a clock to say 1, 2, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3. It can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So in other words, it's whatever your pace works for your body. I use 4 and 6 and seconds just because it's people understand what I'm asking. But do what's best for your body. And if it doesn't feel good the way I've described it, really focus on what works on your body. That to me is much more important. I also happen to be a yoga instructor, and we always say that yoga begins when you honor what your body needs. And so I'll say that for everyone, that's always the case. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah. That is terrific. I'm really enjoying how this is kind of wrapping up, but I wonder if there's any other questions out there for Dena, anything that you'd like to know before maybe she gives us a final comment or a final concluding thought. Anybody else have anything they want to ask? Okay, we got a hand raised, but I need something in the Q&A. Is there a?
I did get one comment from Jessie Summers. It said, no immediate questions, but thank you so much for speaking to us today.
That's very nice. Thank you.
We got a thank you. Thank you. All right, let's see if I got anything else. No. Well, Dena, what would you say? You're right. This was short. I want more. So I'm thinking, what's the last thing you would say to us?
Yeah, I would just recommend that folks do, delve a little bit more if they're interested. If you feel like focusing on your breath is challenging in any way, sometimes I find that, especially I'm a trauma survivor myself. And so I know for many years, I couldn't close my eyes, for example, in public. That just did not feel safe to me. And so knowing what your body needs and what works for your body, I think is such a beautiful beginning place, right? To start. There's so much more to know, but you know, I would suggest folks try it once, try it twice, try it 3 times. If after 3 times you're still feeling like this just isn't for me, then fine. It's not necessarily for everyone. But if it's something that you're like, wow, this could really help me, and you start to realize, I know for me personally, mindfulness has truly transformed my life. And that's honestly the reason that I wrote the book that I did, my latest book, because it was so helpful to me that I thought, I got to get this out there. I got to, you know, if I can help even one person, you know, be of service in that way to even one person, it's paid for itself kind of thing, or it's not paid for itself, but it's done what it's meant to do. And so that's really what I would say, is that if folks feel intrigued or interested in learning more, or even if you already have a mindfulness practice and you want to deepen it or think about it in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a lot more out there. So yeah, that's what I will leave.
I think with these practices, generally when you start, you're pretty sure you're doing it wrong. And your first impression is, oh, that can't be right. But that really is hard on yourself. You just kind of keep trying it, I think, is a kind of a rule of thumb. But thank you so much for coming today, Dena. I appreciate all you've shared with us. And I think it really gives us the research background as well as the actual practice elements that can let us include this in our programs and in our activities. So I really want to thank you from all of us and from the branches and the state.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
and
much.
I want to thank both of you for just a wonderful session. The questions were outstanding. The answers were outstanding. And I think all of us will look forward to looking at leadership from the inside out a little more and being able to practice that. So thank you, Carolyn, for the questions, and Susan for moderating this, and especially Dr. Dena Samuels. Thank you so much. Thank you.